I made a short film. It's an 18-minute fiction film called Temma, and it really deals with some of these ethical issues of new research in neuroscience, computational neuroscience, robotics, artificial intelligence. I'd love to show you a 3-minute excerpt from my film, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the research that really inspired me to want to create work about this. So this is from the very beginning of the film.
Subjectivity module 187. Previous accuracy 68%. Gold, mustard, straw, wheat, sand, canary, lemon, saffron, daffodil.
What does it remind me of? Wait.
Hey, Temma, you there?
Yes.
Is Matt Nelson with you?
I don't think so. Have you asked Alyssa?
What's up?
Have you seen Matt Nelson?
Not lately. Is he lost?
Well, I just want to make sure he doesn't freeze out there.
Matt Nelson is in the hallway.
Ah, yes. Thank you, Temma.
You're welcome, Philip.
Wow. It's pretty good, Mom.
Thanks, honey.
Hey, what do you say we go to bed?
I will. We just need to finish this subjectivity module.
Is that something that needs to get done tonight?
Yes, it is.
Temma.
Please, just let me work.
Fine.
What's wrong?
Where were we?
A yellow chair.
Right, the yellow chair. I can't remember.
So that was the beginning of the film Temma. And the film goes on from there. So I'll just tell you a little bit to summarize the story. This character, Temma, is a neuroprogrammer who has been debilitated by a neurologically degenerative disease. And for many years, she has been building a home lab to try to create a computational model of her own mind. This is the entity that she's kind of created using ways of modeling the brain, ways of kind of downloading memories, some of the things that we've already heard about tonight. So this film, takes place maybe in 20 years. Unclear exactly when these technologies will be available, but there's definitely a lot of research happening right now that is indicating the capability and the possibility of these kinds of situations. So the story really takes off from here of Temma herself. Her physical situation deteriorates very rapidly, and she goes into a non-responsive state, a coma. And her family that you got introduced to, her daughter and her husband, have to figure out what to do with this incomplete, strange, not fully functional entity that she's created that nevertheless really captures something very essential about her and about who she is. So I, of course, am not a scientist. I don't really know, I can't really talk about some of this research in great knowledge. All I know is what I've read. But I come from a family of scientists, and I've always been fascinated by these deep philosophical questions of what is consciousness? What is identity? How do we perceive reality? And as I've been reading about some of the research that is going on in these fields, I feel like the research is starting to speak to some of these questions in very profound ways. And of course, starting to raise some disturbing questions that maybe humanity has not had to face yet. So one of the pieces of research that really fascinated me and inspired me are the efforts at whole brain simulation and brain modeling that are going on around the world. One of the biggest projects in that regard is the IBM Blue Brain project, which I'm sure many of you already know about. It's an international endeavor trying to create a simulation, ultimately a simulation of the human brain. So far, they have successfully created a large-scale neural simulation of the neocortex of a rat in 2008. In 2009, they were able to exceed the cortical functioning of a cat, which is actually, marking exponential progress in a very short amount of time. And the latest I read from Henry Markham, the director of the Blue Brain Project, was that he predicts they will be able to complete human brain simulation by 2023. I'm not sure where he's getting this figure, but the limitations are on the absolutely massive computing power that's needed to simulate the human brain. Each neuron in these simulations requires the amount of power that's equivalent to a laptop. So the human brain has, some estimates say, 85 billion neurons. So massive, massive computing power is required to create these large-scale models. But this, in fact, is the very kind of model that my character, Temma, has created. She's building, in my mind, this has already happened in the world of the film. She maybe worked on something like the Blue Brain Project, and when she had to leave work and start working at home, she kind of transferred what had already happened in this field to this personal endeavor of modeling her own brain functioning. Another area of research that directly inspired this film is the decoding of images from the brain. So some might say that that's one of the more kind of sci-fi elements in this movie, is the fact that this computer is actually reading memories from Temma's mind, images, sounds, things that she's remembering. Inchoate images, they're not being clearly shown, they're not being clearly interpreted, but they are being downloaded, pulled from her mind. And in fact, this kind of activity is already going on, and it's already possible in these quite rudimentary ways, but they're making progress all the time. So in 2008, I read a study that said that they were able to reproduce basic visual images from the visual cortex of human subjects who were shown images, and they were essentially able to like read these patterns and images from their mind and reproduce them on a computer. In 2009, they made the leap of being able to reproduce and interpret natural images. So rather than squares and circles, shapes that are abstract, they were able to reproduce natural images like faces, trees, objects. And by 2010, there was a study that said that they were able to reproduce memory traces. So, and the way that they're doing this is through combining what they're the signals that they're getting from the mind with these massive data banks, like Jim was saying, these semantic libraries of what a specific signal is referring to, and they're able to kind of build these lexicons for what certain activity means in terms of imagery. Obviously, the implications for this are really profound and frightening and enormous, and the potential to visualize and record our dreams, for instance, is something that I'm sure will fascinate many artists in the years to come. Another field of research that inspired me has already also been mentioned tonight, neuroprosthetics and brain-computer interfaces, brain-computer interface devices. So Temma in the film, she's paralyzed. She operates her computer by an implant in her brain. And in my mind, this implant also stimulates her memory function using some of the techniques that we've already heard about tonight. So in fact, these kinds of devices have been available since the 70s. They've already allowed paralyzed patients to move robotic arms and to operate computers via their thoughts alone. They've allowed the restoration of vision and hearing to the blind and the deaf. And as seen in my film, they can be used to stimulate memory function. And finally, another area of research that really inspired me visually and in terms of human interaction is the proliferation of artificially intelligent avatars in our society. So, we kind of think of cyborgs, androids as these things in science fiction, and by the time they get to the science fiction stage, they're already almost fully functional. They're almost like humans. They're played by human actors often, or voiced by human actors. So we don't often come in contact with the very kind of rudimentary intermediate stages that these technologies are already going through. Obviously, we're years away from Blade Runner or some of the depictions that we've seen in science fiction of artificial beings. But some of the things that these artificial entities can already do are quite fascinating. Obviously, we know that computer systems can already understand and produce natural language. We already have Siri on our phones. That was a really hard one process and ability. It was very difficult to get computers to understand natural language. But we also have computers that recognize faces and objects, as the entity in this film does. So I refer to her as Temma 2. This is the woman that's the face of the machine. But not only can she recognize faces and objects and remember histories of the faces she's interacted with, and thus almost have memories of her relationships with certain members of the household, she's also able to interpret facial expression and tone of voice to interpret emotion. And this is already possible. We already have kind of ways of diagramming the human face and the human tonal inflection to understand how emotion is being conveyed. And these machines can kind of blindly understand what we're feeling. And if they know that, this face means sad, they can say, what's wrong? And once they can do that, they can begin to, with their own faces, mimic emotion and elicit empathetic responses from us as we see those mimicked false emotions. So it gets into some really interesting territory of, what's real, what's not. But the bottom line is you feel like you're interacting with an empathetic subject. And we've already seen some of these artificially intelligent avatars in online and in customer service, and I'm sure they'll proliferate as time goes on. So really this film deals with this interstitial developmental phase in the development of these technologies where they are not perfect and they are disturbing because they are not perfect. So in the film, the husband, Temma's husband, is extremely disturbed by this entity that his wife is leaving behind. He's almost offended that he now has to somehow deal with this false reproduction of her, this kind of facsimile that could never possibly capture her full complexity, her beautiful, ephemeral soul that arises above the physical substrate that she's in. This revulsion that he feels, that this character feels, is what Masahiro Mori coined in 1970 as the Uncanny Valley, this feeling of revulsion that we have towards artificial beings that aren't yet perfect. We experience them as impaired human beings rather than as highly developed androids. But it is this kind of transitional stage that we need to kind of investigate our own feelings in, because by the time we get to they're just like us, things will have changed quite a bit. But it's now that we have to kind of start on this paradigm shift, a really massive paradigm shift that's required now for our society as we become kind of more and more connected to our technologies, more an extension of our own technologies, and as it becomes possible to reduce human cognitive functions and maybe eventually human consciousness to a physical substrate. The paradigm shift is similar in scale to that created by Galileo when he proved that the Earth is not the center of the universe, similar to what Darwin showed when he proved that we are descendant from apes. It's this progression of we are not as special as we think. We can create and mimic these processes that we think of as beyond physical. We can mimic those processes in physical substrates. And that is frightening on a really profound level, and we have to start to deal with that as a society. So just to conclude, my work really deals with the intersection of the mind, body, and machine. I really feel that I'm very inspired by and frightened by where we are as a society. The fact that our technology is becoming almost taking over our daily lives. The degree to which we are connected to our computers, to our machines, they are these mediators between us and the physical world. They mirror our mental processes, and they are these immortal extensions of ourselves. It's really the continuation of an age-old obsession of human beings to reproduce and isolate the core of what makes us human, from the myth of Pygmalion to the monster that Frankenstein created who was so dangerous because he could feel, to the golem, Pinocchio. And ultimately it raises the question, can we love these creations that we make? Can we experience human emotions toward fictional entities? And I think that we can, because we fall in love with fictional characters all the time, and people disappear into virtual gaming worlds. So I want to leave you with that. I think we can love things that even though we know they are artificial. Thank you so much.